Chapter 11. In Texas, Tyler skirted Lake of the Pines, crossed the Sabine River by ferry boat near Mineola, later the Trinity, not far from Crossroads. When he studied his map, he saw other rivers descending like rungs of a ladder on his way to Eagle Pass. The Brazos, the Colorado, the Pedernales, so many wild rivers to be crossed in a world once composed of a single small stream named Sweet Creek. Tyler hoped he could remember the names of all the towns he passed through so he'd be able to tell Mama and Lucas. Mount Pleasant, Newsom, Quitman, Murchison, Corsicana, Dawson, McGregor, Belton, Burnett. Soon he couldn't remember in which order he'd passed through such places. Their names melted together in his mind. After a while, he couldn't recall what sight he'd seen in which town. He bought a canteen, his first purchase with Uncle Matt's money. He splurged on a dozen tins of meat and a bag of hard biscuits, many of which turned out to be wormy. Bigger ate them anyway. Soon the country he traveled across became flat and dry. The trees were short and scrubby, no longer casting cool umbrellas of shade. The lively creeks of the up-country gave way to thin, brown streams. Fishing got poor. The earth was covered with chaparral that tore at his trousers. The days were hot, the nights astonishingly cold. The sun was nailed daily like a brass plate in the fierce blue sky, and Tyler kept the kerchief Uncle Matt had given him tied high around his neck. The flat land was relieved now and then by gullies and washes that had been carved by the sudden heavy downpours of the desert country. He lay in the shady banks of such dry gullies during the hottest part of the day, then forced himself to walk late into the evening to be sure of making good mileage. The going became hard in a new way. Tyler was wearier than he could ever remember being. He had grown terribly thin. His collarbone stuck out. His hip bones were a pair of hooks his pants hung from. Once, as he bathed in a small stream, he noticed his chest was devoid of excess flesh. His ribs so prominent they could have been strummed like banjo strings. Often there was a funny taste in his mouth, dry and metallic. Some nights his feet were so swollen he could hardly pull them out of the dead soldier's shoes. He had started to wear them as near as he could remember when he went through a place called Prairie Hill. He was too tired to talk to Bigger any more. Bigger himself kept his head low, panting in the merciless heat. Boy and dog scarcely lifted their feet out of the dust, used no more energy than was needed barely to keep going. Tyler was too weary at night to read the letters in his pocket. The joy of getting closer to Papa faded, became like a dream he couldn't quite remember after waking in the morning. Each time he went through a village or passed someone in a dusty road, Tyler asked about General Shelby. "He was headed this way," he explained, "and I think my father might be riding with him." The answer he got from strangers didn't vary much. "No, son. Nobody hereabouts has seen any bunch of soldiers such as ones like you're talking about." There would be a pause for some thoughtful head-scratching. "Pretty hard for 600 men to travel together and not be noticed, don't you reckon? Must be you're mistaken about 'em being headed down Texas way. They best be careful, though. General Phil Sheridan is looking for just such a bunch of fellers, too." At Dripping Springs, someone allowed he had heard a bunch of men were holed up down in San Antonio, but when Tyler examined his map, he realized that to check out the truth of the rumor, he'd have to go at least 60 or 80 miles straight south, 2 or 3 days' worth of walking. Better to disregard talk of such sightings. Better to head straight as an arrow for Eagle Pass. When he knocked at doors along the way, sometimes he'd be lucky enough to get invited to stay for supper, even without doing chores. "I'm not looking for any favors," he explained, "but I'd sure appreciate a meal if you can spare one. Folks in Texas ate differently than folks in Missouri." Tyler soon discovered so many beans. Red, black, white, calico, often cooked with rice, then made spicy with red and green chilies that he wasn't used to. He longed for some of Aunt Margaret's golden fried chicken, or just a plain old warm biscuit with a ribbon of sorghum stitched across its top. Soon he stopped once at a sheep ranch where the owner gave Bigger a hard look. "Don't know if I can do much for you, Sonny," the man growled. "That dog you got there, why, he looks like a sheep killer to me. If I were to put you up and he were to so much as muss the wool on one of my flock, I'd be obliged to shoot him, skin him, and nail his pesky hide to this here door." "No, sir, I don't think he's a sheep killer," Tyler answered, but the possibility that Bigger, being hungry, might make a meal out of an unwary lamb worried him. "I'll see to it he sleeps right beside me all night," he promised. Later, in a lean-to behind the house where the rancher offered him a place to sleep, Tyler tied the rope from his bedroll around Bigger's neck and the other end around his own ankle. "Wish folks weren't always threatening to send you to perdition," he complained. "Last thing I need is to lose you." Bigger settled himself against Tyler's thigh as if to say he held no grudges about their particular new sleeping arrangements. Even after he went deeper into the desert, in village after village, with stranger after stranger, the information about General Shelby didn't change. Frowns and curious glances were followed by, "No, haven't seen anything like what you're describing, son. No men, no soldiers, nothing. War's over, you know. Those Union boys made their point. Ain't no more soldiering to be done." Sometimes Tyler took a meal with folks he couldn't talk to. He couldn't understand their language, and they couldn't understand his. The mothers in those small clay homes, their eyes soft and mild in their smooth brown faces, gave him cornmeal cakes with beans on top, and once he drank goat's milk, which tasted richer even than Calico's cream. In the beginning, Tyler had been curious about Bigger's past, about what made the dog flinch so readily, what made him curl his lips so often. None of that mattered any more. What counted was that Bigger was a stick-tight, the name Mama gave to the burrs that used to get snagged in Maggie's ears and tails. Whenever he spoke to Bigger, he always said, "We. We will do this, Bigger," he'd say, or "We'll do that, go that way, Bigger." In the dog's one blue eye and one brown eye there was a comforting reply. "Yes, that suits me. And go where you need to go. I'll stick tight." Finally, tired as he was, Tyler went back to reading Papa's letters. No matter how often he did, the paper seemed to grow thinner and more transparent each evening because the pages had been handled so often. He discovered something new in the words. "Dear family, if I should die in this war, I want you all to stay where you are. Sweet Creek is as good a home place as any man could have picked in this whole wide world. If need be, Tyler can learn to run things." "Yes, Papa, I already have," Tyler wanted to tell him. "The thing is to hold fast to each other." "Yes, Papa, that's what we've done for 4 long years," Tyler whispered. "That oldest boy of mine, being the good son he is, can teach little Lucas what he needs to know." "I'm trying to, Papa. And, wife, I know you will raise up our Rosalie to be as fine a woman as her mother." "Rosalie helps Mama make butter now, Papa. You'd be proud of her." After a while, there were no more villages on the plains, only small ranches scattered so far apart that sometimes Tyler walked for days without seeing a soul. There were no roads through the sagebrush. He simply followed dim trails through the sun-scorched grass that had been made by antelope and rabbits and coyotes. Sometimes Tyler roasted a lizard for supper after he'd knocked one senseless as it sunned itself in the heat of the day. The desert rabbits were too fleet-footed for Bigger to run down any more because he, too, was so thin his sides had caved in under his thick fur. Tyler learned how to slice cacti and squeeze moisture out of the pieces. With the prickles removed, the flesh of certain cacti tasted sweet, almost like a piece of fruit. Bigger relished such treats too. One night a terrible thunderstorm boomed across the prairie. Lightning made the sky bright as day, and the dry gully Tyler had camped beside overran its banks. He scooped up his gear and raced for higher ground. Somehow Uncle Matt's blue kerchief was carried away by the rushing water. It was late afternoon when Tyler spotted General Shelby's troops. He disbelieved what he saw. He turned his gaze away. He looked again. A long line of men riding in twos and threes were etched against the distant horizon. Heat shimmered off the baked brown land in quivering sheets. Should he take those black figures, no larger than ants against the skyline, to be what he had been searching for? Tyler squinted hard. Perhaps he was looking at a mirage. "Bigger?" he whispered, finally willing to accept what was there. I think maybe it's General Shelby and his men." But they were miles away. Can I catch up to them before they recede even farther into the distance? Tyler wondered. Oh, what he'd give for a horse, even a sorry, crippled-up, glass-eyed old has-been like the one Mr. Blackburn rode to school. Tyler walked faster, finally forced himself into a trot. Bigger loped along behind. "You got 4 legs instead of only 2, Tyler complained, panting. He couldn't keep up such a pace. Neither could Bigger. They didn't have the kind of strength they'd had when their journey started. Tyler's breath rattled in his chest. Sweat soaked his clothes till he looked as if he had been standing in a rain. He longed to quench his thirst, but knew he shouldn't drink until he found a place to refill his canteen. "So many men riding together are bound to leave a trail that's easy to follow," he told Bigger when they'd both dropped back to a walk. "Even if we don't catch 'em today, maybe we'll be able to track 'em pretty easy tomorrow and the day after. And then, oh, then Papa would clap him against his hard chest, would cry, 'Tyler, Tyler, is it really you, boy?' His smile would be wide and welcoming. In a few days he and Papa would turn around and go home. Home. The word was as beautiful as the pale blue Aggie in his pocket. As he rolled it on his tongue, home, home. The word was round, smooth, complete. Tyler caught up with the soldiers after they had pitched camp on the banks of the Rio Grande. He was surprised. He'd expected General Shelby's men would be in rank, that their uniforms would be a credit to them, that they would look purposeful and military. Instead, some were dressed in raggedy cast-offs, taken from dead men on some battlefield, Tyler asked himself. And a few were bareheaded, their foreheads and noses blistered from the desert sun, their lips cracked and bleeding, their eyes glittered deep in their sockets, their cheeks were drawn, their horses looked badly fed. As quickly as he could, Tyler scanned the knots of men for a glimpse of Black Jack Bohannon. Papa was so tall he'd stand out anywhere. His hair and beard were so black he'd look like no one else. His voice would be richer than any other soldier's, as his laugh would be merrier